The rain started softly, just a whisper on the high glass windows of the 23rd floor, but it was enough to make Elena glance up from her screen. She'd been typing non-stop for the past 2 hours, cross-checking logistics for a last-minute international shipment the Singapore office had flagged. Outside, the city was turning silver under a growing sheet of water, blurring the skyline into abstract shadows. She sighed and rubbed her temples. The office was nearly empty now. Most of the staff had left before the clouds rolled in. Only the faint hum of emergency lighting, the occasional buzz of a printer, and the distant roll of thunder kept her company. Except she wasn't alone. Elena didn't have to turn around to know that Cameron Blake, the CEO of Blake Industries, was still in his office behind the smoked glass door. He always stayed late, and so did she. She never questioned it. She never asked why a man with a penthouse apartment and no family waiting at home would sit in silence behind frosted glass for hours after the building emptied. But she noticed. She noticed everything about him, from the way he quietly greeted her every morning with a simple "Elena" and a small nod, to the way he always read the financial reports twice, highlighting the same lines she had instinctively flagged. He wasn't cold, just unreadable, like a page of beautiful poetry locked behind bulletproof glass. And for 3 years, she had been his executive assistant, his gatekeeper, scheduler, fixer of everything, and nothing more. That was fine. It had to be. Her sister was finishing high school. Their parents were gone. The bills didn't pay themselves, and neither did the grief that came like a wave every time she slowed down. She didn't have space in her life for mystery or distraction. And Cameron Blake was both. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She glanced down. A text from her sister. "Can you pick up some stuff on your way home? Bread, noodles, hair gel. Also, there's a raccoon in the garbage bin again. I think it's plotting something." Elena smiled faintly. A sudden crash of thunder snapped her back to the present, followed by a flicker, then full darkness. The power cut out. A second later, the emergency generators hummed to life. Dim amber lighting came on around the hallway corners. The overhead stayed dead. The rain grew heavier, now pounding the windows in waves. She stood, walked toward the break room. No big deal. Power outages happen during summer storms. But still, she found herself glancing back at the glass door of the CEO's office. It was open. Cameron stood there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, phone in one hand, eyebrows slightly furrowed. "Looks like the storm knocked out the grid," he said quietly, confirming the obvious. Elena nodded. "Generators are working, at least." He paused. "You're still here." "So are you." They stared at each other for a beat too long. Not awkward exactly, just unfamiliar. She cleared her throat. "I'll grab the candles from the emergency kit. Do you want coffee?" "No power," he reminded her. "I'll warm it on the stovetop in the break room. Old school." A smile flickered on his face. Not much, but enough. "Thanks," he said. "I'd like that." She walked away with a strange feeling in her chest, like a door had quietly opened between them, and neither of them quite knew what was on the other side. 10 minutes later, the break room was softly lit by 3 stubby white candles. Elena had set the kettle on the emergency gas burner, and the smell of instant coffee was starting to fill the air. She heard footsteps. Cameron entered, his tall frame almost too big for the small space. He didn't speak right away, just took in the scene. The flickering light, the raindrops racing down the windows, the soft steam curling from the mugs. "It's peaceful," he said finally. "Almost romantic," she joked without thinking, then froze. He blinked, and for the first time in 3 years he looked startled. Not annoyed, not confused, just caught off guard. "I mean," she stammered, waving it off, "only in the candlelight dinner with your boss kind of way. You know, business romance, with spreadsheets." She wanted to punch herself, but Cameron didn't laugh at her. He didn't make a joke or change the subject. He just nodded slowly, looked down at the counter, then up at her. "You've been working late all week," he said softly, "even when the office is quiet. I have a lot on my plate." "I know, I see it." That surprised her. "You do?" He met her eyes. "I see everything, Elena." And there it was, that feeling again. A space between them slowly collapsing, a silence that didn't feel empty, but full of everything neither of them had ever said. The kettle hissed. She poured the coffee and slid him a mug. Their hands touched, barely, and she felt something like electricity run up her arm. Neither of them spoke for a while. The rain kept falling, the candles kept flickering, and in the low hum of the storm something unspoken sat between them like an unopened letter, waiting. Elena Hart never learned how to ask for help, not when her mother's cough turned into hospital visits, not when her father stopped coming home, not when her baby sister, Mia, showed up at her bedroom door at 13, eyes wide with the kind of fear children shouldn't know. Back then, Elena was only 20, working part-time as a barista and full-time as a college student with dreams of becoming a creative director. She shelved those dreams the day her mom was diagnosed and never took them down again. There wasn't time for dreaming after that. There was only surviving. Bills didn't pause for grief. Rent didn't lower for orphans. And younger sisters didn't raise themselves. So Elena did what she always did. She adapted. She found work, real work, the kind that paid health insurance and came with early mornings, tight deadlines, and sharp men in suits who didn't believe in second chances. Blake Industries hadn't been the goal. It was the answer to a desperate prayer. She remembered walking into the lobby 3 years ago, resume wrinkled, blazer borrowed, wondering if she looked as scared as she felt. She remembered the receptionist whispering, "You're interviewing to assist him?" With wide eyes like she'd said the lion. She hadn't known who him was then. She learned quickly. Cameron Blake, CEO, strategic genius, billionaire, single. Whispers surrounded him, cold, private, brutal in the boardroom. He wasn't the kind of man people worked with. He was the kind of man you worked for and prayed not to disappoint. Elena hadn't impressed him that day. Not really. He'd read her resume in silence, asked her 3 questions, and told her flatly, "You're underqualified." She had nodded. "I am, but I learn fast, and I need this." She hadn't begged. She hadn't cried. She'd just said it like it was a fact. "I need this." Cameron had stared at her for a long time. Then he said, "Be here Monday, 7 a.m. sharp," and that was the beginning. She hadn't missed a day since. She'd never asked for time off, even when Mia had the flu. She'd taken conference calls while folding laundry and answered emails in hospital waiting rooms. She kept a smile on her face and a backup charger in her purse. She didn't talk about her past, didn't cry in the office, didn't show weakness. And over time, she became the woman people relied on, the woman who held it all together. But the thing about holding everything together for too long is that eventually your hands start to shake. Back in the break room, Elena sipped her coffee slowly. The lights were still out. The storm hadn't eased. Cameron was still there, leaning against the counter, eyes unreadable in the candlelight. She felt his gaze, heavy and thoughtful. "I've always admired that about you," he said suddenly. She blinked. "Admired what?" "Your stillness." "My stillness." He nodded. "Most people panic when things go wrong. You don't. You steady the room." She didn't know what to say to that. It was the kind of compliment that slid under the armor and landed in the soft places. "I don't always feel steady," she admitted quietly. "Even better that you manage to appear that way." She smiled faintly. "It's just practice." He looked at her with something like sorrow. "That's the part that makes me ache," he said, "that you had to practice." Elena stared at him. She didn't know what to do with that sentence. For 3 years, Cameron Blake had been calm, professional, distant. He never raised his voice, never flirted, never stepped out of line. But he also never looked at her the way he was looking at her now. Like she wasn't just another employee, but something he'd studied, admired, protected, from a distance. "What are you really doing here tonight, Cameron?" she asked softly. He didn't flinch at the use of his first name. If anything, his eyes softened. "I stayed to finish paperwork," he said. "But I didn't leave because you didn't." Thunder cracked again. A flicker of lightning lit the room. "You stayed for me?" she asked, not believing it even as she said it. He nodded once. "I always stay. For you." Elena swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around her mug, and in the quiet that followed, filled only by the hum of rain and the flicker of flame, she realized something. He had been watching her, not in the way that made her feel small or unsafe, but in the way you watch something valuable, fragile, irreplaceable. And for the first time in 3 years, she wondered what it would feel like to let someone help carry the weight, to let someone in, to stop being so damn strong, just for a moment. When she looked up, Cameron was still watching her, and the look in his eyes, it wasn't distance, it wasn't duty. It was something a little too close to longing. Cameron Blake wasn't the kind of man who believed in rushing anything. Not success, not healing, and especially not love. He learned that lesson the hard way. He had spent his early 30s being chased by everything women thought he represented. Power, prestige, protection. But once they saw the quiet man underneath the wealth, once they noticed how much time he spent in silence, how his eyes never laughed even when his mouth did, they usually left. It wasn't that he was difficult. It was that he was deep, and most people didn't know what to do with depth. And then there was Elena. She didn't chase him. She didn't flirt. She didn't linger. She didn't ask him unnecessary questions. She was the only assistant who never tried to impress him. And yet, she impressed him anyway. The first time he saw her cry, it wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud. She'd stepped into the elevator, thought she was alone, and crumpled just a little. Just enough for him to see it before the doors shut. She didn't know he was still on the call watching from across the hall. She didn't know that her quiet pain stayed with him for hours afterward. That was 3 years ago. Since then, he'd watched her rebuild herself in real time, day after day, night after night, late shifts, Missed birthdays, fast food dinners in between client presentations. She didn't complain. She didn't collapse. She didn't curse the world for what it had taken. She just kept going. And somewhere in the middle of that, between coffee orders and color-coded calendars, he fell in love. But he never said a word, not one, because he knew what it would look like. The billionaire boss falling for the girl behind the desk, the classic cliché. He wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. He was afraid of hurting her. He saw the way she pulled herself together every morning like armor, the way she never leaned on anyone, the way she smiled at everyone except herself. If he confessed what he felt too soon, too fast, too suddenly, she would retreat. She would doubt herself. She might think he was confusing gratitude with love, or worse, control with care. So Cameron did what most men couldn't. He waited. He remembered the exact moment he knew. It wasn't one of those big scenes. No dramatic music. No slow-motion spin in a ballroom. It was a Wednesday. She had been on the phone with Mia, her little sister, arguing about college choices while organizing 3 sets of files and correcting a typo in his speech. When she hung up, she whispered, "God, I'm trying so hard." Then she smiled like nothing was wrong and walked into his office to deliver the corrected notes. That moment broke him, because he realized he wasn't watching a strong woman. He was watching a woman forced to be strong, and all he wanted in that instant was to make the world quieter for her, to make her life softer, to give her space where she didn't have to be so put together all the time. But he didn't say that. He said thank you, and she smiled and left the room. Now, 3 years later, he was standing in a candlelit break room, watching her sip coffee with her bare fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug like it was the only warmth she had left in the world. He wondered if she could hear it, the pounding of his heart. He wondered if she would believe him, if he told her that she wasn't just a good worker or a kind woman. She was the reason he stayed grounded, the reason he didn't date anyone else, the reason he looked forward to mornings, not for the meetings, but for her. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. She looked up. "Leaving what?" "This job, this life, starting over somewhere else." Her eyes softened, then hardened again, just a flicker. "I don't have the luxury." "What if you did?" She studied him. "Why are you asking me that?" He didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "Because sometimes I wonder if you're staying out of survival or out of fear." She laughed, but it was dry, tired. Both, probably. Cameron stepped forward, then paused. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Elena. No one else will carry it for me. I would." Silence. A beat too long, a truth too heavy. Her breath caught, but she masked it with a sip of coffee. He didn't push. He never did. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the silence felt like a storm waiting to break. And for once, Cameron wasn't sure if he should keep holding it in or let it all pour out. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it deepened, beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Blake Industries like a warning, the kind that whispered, "You're not going anywhere tonight." The clock read 9:23 p.m. Elena sat on the edge of the break room couch, legs tucked under her, her blazer folded neatly beside her. Cameron had stepped out to check the security systems. The generator lights were holding, but the elevators were still frozen, and the streets below were a grid of red brake lights, stalled traffic, and broken umbrellas. She checked her phone. No signal. Of course. Mia's last message blinked on the screen. Be safe. I made pasta. Yours is in the fridge. Elena smiled at the emoji, but her stomach churned. This storm wasn't going to pass quickly, which meant she was spending the night here, alone, with him. Cameron returned moments later, hair damp from his trip down the emergency stairwell. He carried a thick blanket, one of the emergency ones kept in the building's HR wellness suite, and a bottle of water. They're advising no one leave, he said calmly, handing her the blanket. Roads are half flooded. Cell towers are shaky. Looks like we're stuck. Figures, she murmured, unfolding the blanket over her legs. It's been that kind of week. He sat across from her, far enough to respect her space, close enough to feel present. You okay? He asked. She gave him a sideways glance. Do I look okay? You look tired, and like you haven't had a night off in months. She chuckled. That's because I haven't. The rain had become a soft rhythm now. Not harsh, not deafening, just steady. Like it was giving them permission to speak the truths they'd swallowed for far too long. I watched you rebuild your life piece by piece, Cameron continued. I watched you care for Mia like a mother. I watched you carry burdens no one else saw. You never once asked for help, because no one ever offered. I wanted to, every day. She turned to him, and for the first time there was no defense in her posture, no armor, just the woman she was when no one was watching, worn, tender, brave. But why tonight? She asked. Why now? He hesitated. Because something about this storm made me realize I was hiding behind silence, telling myself I was protecting you, but really, I was protecting myself. From what? From losing you, from crossing a line I couldn't uncross, from telling you how I felt and watching you walk away. She stared at him, and then something inside her softened, broke, reassembled, because she knew that fear. She had lived in it. She'd convinced herself for years that silence was safer than vulnerability, that needing someone made her weak, that loving someone could only lead to loss. But Cameron had loved her, in silence, without expectation, without pressure. And now he was offering the truth, not as a demand, but as a gift. Elena stepped closer, close enough to hear his breathing shift. I was broken when I met you, she said. Still am in some ways. You were never broken, he said, looking at her like she was sacred. You were just carrying more than anyone ever should. A tear slipped down her cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just stood there, waiting, letting her decide. And then she did. She reached up, slowly, and placed her hand against his chest, over his heart. It was racing, just like hers. I don't know what this is, she whispered, but I'm not walking away. He covered her hand with his, and in that moment, wrapped in candlelight, shadows, and years of silence, it was enough. The truth was finally spoken. The conversation they never had was now a memory and a beginning. The moment had passed, but the air between them hadn't cleared. If anything, it had thickened, with all the things they'd finally said, and all the emotions neither of them quite knew what to do with yet. Elena stood by the window now, staring out at the fading rain. Her fingers were still warm from where they had rested on Cameron's chest, and she swore she could still feel the echo of his heartbeat in her palm. Cameron stayed behind her, silent, still. Then, quietly, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. His fingers brushed velvet. The small black box was still there. It had been there for months, unopened, unspoken for, carried like a secret he was never sure he'd be brave enough to share. He hadn't brought it tonight on purpose. He always carried it, not because he was expecting a perfect moment, but because he believed in one. He had imagined giving it to her 100 different ways. At the office Christmas party, on her birthday, even just one quiet morning, after a staff meeting, when she was laughing over a spilled cup of coffee. But none of those moments ever felt right, not because she wasn't ready, but because he wasn't. Until now. "Can I show you something?" he asked softly. Elena turned from the window, brows drawn. "What is it?" He stepped forward and slowly revealed the box, worn at the edges from months of quiet waiting. Her eyes widened. "Is that?" "Yes." She didn't speak. He opened it without a word. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. No flashy diamonds, just a thin gold band and a small oval stone set in rose gold. Delicate, timeless. It was perfect, and her breath caught. "Cameron." "I didn't bring this here for tonight," he said quickly, reading the hesitation on her face. "I've carried it for months, every day. Just in case." "In case of what?" "In case the moment ever came where you weren't just surviving," he said, voice rough. "In case you ever looked at me the way you did tonight." She blinked fast, emotion swelling behind her eyes. "I'm not proposing tonight, Elena," he said. "I'm not trying to pressure you. I just want you to know this isn't new for me. It's not sudden. It's not a reaction to a blackout or candlelight or some romantic storm." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've been loving you in silence for 3 years, and this ring is just a reflection of that, a symbol of what I was willing to wait for." Her hand slowly reached out, not to take it, but just to touch it, to feel it was real. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking you to be." She looked up at him, really looked, and in his face she saw no pressure, only presence, only patience, only love. "You carried that around every day?" she asked, trying to smile through her tears. He nodded. "Left pocket, inside jacket, next to my heart." She laughed, shaky. "That's either really romantic or really intense." "Maybe both," he admitted, "but I figured, if the time ever came, I didn't want to have to wait to go get it." "Why not?" "Because if you ever said yes, I wanted to put it on your finger before you had the chance to change your mind." Elena looked at the ring again, then at him, then back at the ring. And for a moment, the storm outside was forgotten, because the one inside her had finally quieted. She didn't take the ring, not yet, but she didn't hand it back either. She closed the box slowly and held it in her hands like it was something sacred. "I'm not saying yes," she said softly, "but I'm not saying no either. That's more than enough." She stepped forward, closed the distance between them, and laid her head gently on his chest. He wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, not to claim her, but to steady her, to remind her that for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't have to carry everything alone. The storm had passed, but it left pieces behind. Water still clung to the windows like tears refusing to fall. The sky outside the office was pale gray, softening into morning, a new day, but not the same one Elena thought she'd wake up to. She hadn't slept. Neither had Cameron. They didn't speak much after she closed the ring box, just sat together, quietly, side by side on the break room couch, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting loosely on her knee. There were no more words to give last night. Only presence, only breath, only warmth. But with morning came reality, and with reality came memory. Pain doesn't knock when it returns. It just shows up, dressed in the voice of your ex, the mistakes you survived, the doubt you thought you'd buried. And for Elena, that voice came back full force the moment she checked her phone. Mia had texted. The power was back on at home. School was canceled for the storm aftermath. She was safe. But below Mia's message was his name, Tyrell. Elena's chest tightened. She hadn't spoken to Tyrell in over 2 years, and still, somehow, the message made her hands shake. Tyrell, saw you on the company site. You still working for that rich guy. You look good. Miss talking to you. Thought maybe we could catch up. You free? She didn't realize she was holding her breath until her fingers turned cold. Cameron walked into the room, hair slightly damp, tie loosened, 2 mugs of fresh coffee in his hands. He saw her face and instantly knew something was wrong. He didn't ask. He just placed the mug gently beside her and sat across from her, elbows on his knees. Elena. She looked up, eyes clouded. It's okay, he said. Whatever it is, you can say it. She hesitated, then handed him the phone. He read it, slowly, carefully. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, hardened. Elena, you don't owe him anything, he said. I know. He has no right to reach out to you. I know that too. But it still rattled you. She nodded. He was the first man I let in after everything fell apart, she said quietly. I thought he saw me. Really saw me. Cameron's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. Elena continued. He said all the right things, promised all the right futures. But when my life got hard, when my mom got sick, when Mia needed more than I could give, he changed. She looked up at him. He called me a burden, said I was too much, that I made him feel like he was drowning. Cameron's hand curled into a fist on his knee. He didn't speak. He just let her finish. So, I stopped letting people in. I stopped being too much. I became quiet, strong, reliable. I figured if I could just be low maintenance enough, no one would ever leave again. Her voice cracked. Cameron reached for her hand, gently, as if asking permission. She let him, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Elena, he said, voice low, you don't have to shrink yourself for anyone, not even me. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years she felt safe, not flattered, not impressed, not temporarily important, safe. You make me want to be seen again, she whispered. His eyes didn't leave hers. And you make me want to speak again. They sat in the quiet for a long time. No pressure, no demands, no timelines. Just the slow undoing of everything the past tried to break, and the quiet rebuilding of something new. Later that morning, she blocked Tyrell's number, not out of anger, but because some stories don't deserve to come back just because the door is unlocked, and this time she was ready to start a new chapter with someone who never left in the first place. By the time Elena finally left the building, the sun had started to rise, not loudly, but slowly, as if it too were recovering from the night before. The storm was gone, but something about her world still felt different. Not wrong, not unsettled, just changed. She stood outside the tall glass doors of Blake Industries, holding her shoes in one hand, her heels clicking softly against the pavement with each step as she walked toward her car. She didn't look back, not because she didn't want to, but because she already knew. If she looked back and saw him watching her, something inside her might crumble, and right now she needed space to feel everything. That morning, Elena didn't go straight home. She drove, nowhere specific, just through the empty streets of a city that hadn't yet woken up. Her hair was still damp from the shower she'd taken at the office's wellness floor. Her phone was off, her mind a blur. Last night, Cameron Blake had confessed 3 years of silent love. He had given her space and a ring, and a truth she didn't expect to receive in this lifetime. And all she could think was, what do I do with a man who waited for me without ever asking me to hurry? At noon, she walked through her front door. Mia was sitting cross-legged on the couch, cereal bowl in her lap, watching some old high school drama on mute while texting furiously on her phone. "You look weird," Mia said, glancing up. Like, quietly dazed. Was the storm that intense? Elena dropped her bag on the chair and kicked off her shoes. It was a long night. Mia narrowed her eyes. "Did you sleep at the office?" Elena nodded. "With him." A pause. "Yes." Mia's spoon clattered into the bowl. "Wait, hold on. Did something—" Her eyes widened. "Elena, did y'all kiss?" "No." "Did you want to?" Elena hesitated. "Yes." "Did he want to?" "Yes." Mia grinned like a kid on Christmas. "Tell me everything." So she did, in small pieces, carefully, but honestly. About the power outage, the candlelight, the confession, the ring, the way he held her like she was something he respected, not just something he wanted. By the end of it, Mia's face had gone soft. "You deserve that kind of love," she said, "the kind that waits." Elena sat beside her, resting her head on Mia's shoulder. "I didn't think I'd ever be ready," she whispered. "Maybe you're not ready for everything yet," Mia said, "but you're ready to stop pretending you don't feel it." Meanwhile, across the city, Cameron sat in his office, same corner, same window view, but everything felt different. He'd spent the morning reviewing reports, replying to emails, attending Zoom calls with investors. But his mind wasn't on the numbers. It was on her. Not because he was worried, but because he was waiting. The kind of waiting that felt like standing at the edge of something sacred, unsure if it would fly or fall. He didn't expect an answer today, but he couldn't stop himself from glancing at the elevator every few minutes, just hoping. At 3:12 p.m., it opened, and there she was, hair pulled back, blazer crisp, steps sure, but her eyes were different, not guarded, not burdened, open. She walked straight to his office, past his assistant, past the door, and stood in front of him without saying a word. He rose, their eyes locked, and she said simply, "Meet me on the rooftop after work." Then she turned and left. Cameron didn't smile. He didn't sigh. He just closed his laptop, because he knew something important was coming. Not a fairy tale, not perfection, but something real. The rooftop was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. The city below hummed with after-work traffic, honking horns and flashing lights. But up here, above it all, it felt like another world. Elena stood at the edge, wind brushing against her face, her arms folded as if holding in something far deeper than nerves. She hadn't rehearsed what she would say. She didn't come with a speech or a script. She came with her truth. And for the first time in her life, that would have to be enough. The rooftop door creaked open. Cameron stepped out, still in his dark gray suit, no tie, his jacket slung casually over one arm. His eyes found hers immediately, and she swore she saw a flicker of fear behind the calm. Good. That meant this mattered to him just as much as it mattered to her. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. "I told you," he said. "I'll always come if it's you." He walked to her slowly, leaving space between them, waiting for her to speak first. Elena turned to face him fully, and for a long moment she just looked at him, not as a boss or a billionaire or a fantasy, but as a man who had watched her struggle and stayed, a man who had never tried to fix her, only protect what was left unbroken, a man who loved her quietly. "I've never said yes to anything this big in my life," she said finally. "I'm not asking for a yes. You offered me a ring. I offered you a truth." Her eyes welled with something heavy and tender. "I don't know how to be loved like this." "You don't have to know. You just have to let it happen." She looked away, blinking fast, then turned back. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be strong," she said, "trying to be dependable, low maintenance, easy to love. And still, it never felt like enough. I was always too much or too little." His voice was soft. "You were always just Elena." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She let him see it all. "I don't know what our life would look like," she continued. "I don't know how to balance love with the fear that it'll disappear. I don't even know how to believe that someone like you, with your money, your options, your world, would choose someone like me." Cameron stepped forward, not fast, not urgent, just sure. "I don't want someone like you," he said. "I want you." He reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out the velvet box again. Didn't open it, just held it, like before. "Not because you're strong, or smart, or beautiful, though you are," he said, eyes locked with hers. "But because when I'm with you, I remember who I actually am." Elena let out a slow, shaky breath, and for the first time she smiled. Not the polite office-ready smile, not the tired smile she gave her sister to keep from breaking, but a real one. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, just like she had the night before, then reached for the box, opened it, took the ring out with shaking fingers, and slipped it onto her own hand. Her voice, barely louder than the wind, said, "This isn't a yes to marriage yet." Cameron nodded. "I understand. It's a yes to us, to trying, to healing, together." He exhaled, and for the first time in years he looked free. He pulled her gently into his arms, one hand cradling her head, the other resting against the small of her back, and whispered, "That's the only yes I ever needed." The sky faded into evening, the wind stilled, and somewhere, beneath the noise of the world, two people who had carried too much for too long finally let go, together. One stormy night changed everything. Not because of the lightning, not because of the blackout, not even because of the ring, but because silence finally broke. And when it did, love had room to speak. It had been 2 weeks since that night on the rooftop. Elena didn't move in. She didn't quit her job. She didn't change her last name. Instead, she started doing something she hadn't done in years: let herself be loved. She let Cameron drive her home some evenings, even when she swore she was fine. She let him bring her coffee in the mornings, even though she used to say she preferred getting it herself. She let him hold her hand on walks, text her midday just to check in, sit quietly beside her on the couch without asking her to speak. She didn't know if this was forever, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to find out. Mia noticed the change first. "You look softer," she said one morning, watching Elena tie her hair up before work. Elena raised a brow. "Softer? Yeah, like you're not always ready to fight the world anymore." Elena smiled. "Maybe I finally realized I don't have to." Cameron changed too, not in big ways, but in the way he let himself be seen. He laughed more now. He called his sister back. He let himself feel joy, not just control. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was hers, and she was his. One Friday evening, as the city buzzed with life and the sky hinted at rain again, Cameron waited for Elena outside her apartment. No driver, no suit, just him. She stepped out in jeans and a soft sweater, hair curled gently at the ends, and her eyes lit up the second she saw him. "I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "For wherever we're going." He held out his hand. "Anywhere, as long as it's with you." They didn't end the night with a proposal. They didn't post pictures. They didn't make speeches. They didn't announce their relationship to the world. They just sat in the car, listening to the rain on the windshield, and let the silence stretch. Not heavy, not tense, just full of everything they were finally brave enough to feel. Elena turned to him as thunder rumbled softly above. "You know," she said, 3 years ago I thought love had passed me by." He looked at her like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. "You didn't miss it," he said. "You were just waiting for the storm." She leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes closing with a peace she never thought she'd know. And in that quiet, rainy night, the girl who never asked for help finally let herself rest, because the millionaire CEO who loved her in silence was no longer silent, and she was no longer alone.